Many of these folks have experience with threatening invasions of their homes, their farms, and a real lack of interest or success of the government in doing anything about this situation.
The 49ers, the Amerikaners, the Afrikaner refugees. Whatever you'd like to call them, they've officially discarded Madiba's rainbow flag for Eisenhower's stars and stripes. Their departure, facilitated by the Trump administration, has generated such intense debate over the Afrikaners' place in this world. But for News 24 editor-in-chief Adriaan Basson, two things have never been more crystal clear. One, that he's indeed an Afrikaner.
I was born into an Afrikaner family. I consider myself an Afrikaner. I identify as an Afrikaner. I'm firstly a South African.
And two, that he's not a refugee.
We can discuss what led ultimately to these Afrikaners leaving South Africa now, but Afrikaners are not refugees. Afrikaners belong in South Africa. This is our home. This is where we're from.
You'll want to stay tuned for the full 24-minute conversation next. Later in the show, the US Episcopal Church refuses to help resettle the Amerikaners, insisting they've received preferential treatment. And finally, Mzansi reverts to its comedic self, offering some solid load-shedding advice for Europeans.
To stay tuned to The Lead for every edition, hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels.
And you can get in touch by mailing us thelead@24.com. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News 24. Well, there's no such thing as an Afrikaner refugee. The Trump administration can claim that white Afrikaners from South Africa are being persecuted, but they're not refugees. They are tied to this country, and that is that. Well, this is the view of our News 24 editor-in-chief, Adriaan Basson. He joins me live on the line now in the hot seat from our Johannesburg studios. How's it, Adriaan? How are you doing today?
I'm fine, Graeme. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. I would like you to take us through to the core of your argument. It's such an engaging piece because you add a lot of history into it, and of course, I'm a huge history lover. You begin with the roots, your ancestry in this country. Take us through that journey and how you found out about it before we sort of get into the crux of your argument.
I think, when we come to work every day, we bring our baggage with us. We bring our past, our history, our stories into the newsroom. And as I was watching these Afrikaners leaving South Africa on Sunday, arriving in Washington, D.C. On Monday, something happened with me. I felt something didn't feel right. It's something sat very wrong with me, and it became very personal because I am an Afrikaner. I was born into an Afrikaner family. I consider myself an Afrikaner. I identify as an Afrikaner. I'm firstly a South African who happens to be an Afrikaner, and our history is a long and troubled and sad and proud history. Afrikaners was born out of a blend, a mixture of people who interacted at the southernmost tip of Africa. In my case, a German fellow by the name of Arnoldus Willem Basson came to Cape Town as the colonial forces did in the 16th century by ship from a town called Wesel in Germany. At the same time, an Indian slave called Ansela van Bengalen was forced onto a ship from what we call India and Bangladesh today, where a lot of Indian slaves were took and brought to South Africa. And Ansela and Willem ended up being married and are my ancestral parents. And I think I just wanted to remind myself actually of the story to kind of defeat this notion that we are something that isn't true. Afrikaners are inherently from South Africa, from Africa. You also had people like Jacob Zuma saying in the past that that the problem started with Van Riebeeck, and kind of saying that we are still those Dutch or Germans or French. It's simply not true. Afrikaners are a mixed, blended cultural grouping. And, you know, the history of Afrikaners is well documented. We've been brutalized and we brutalized. We've been victims and we've been perpetrators. We were thrown into concentration camps by the British, and we brought something called apartheid onto Black South Africans, where Black South Africans were subjugated to second-class citizen life. In 1994, Nelson Mandela offered the hand of freedom and peace to the Afrikaners and said, well, we're not going to chase you out of the country for doing this to black folk, but stay here, be part of the solution, be part of the Rainbow Nation. And, you know, we can discuss what led ultimately to these Afrikaners leaving South Africa now, but Afrikaners are not refugees. Afrikaners belong in South Africa. This is our home. This is where we're from. We're not from Germany. We're not from Holland. We're not from India or Bangladesh. We're from South Africa. We were formed here. We were born here, and our blood is inherently and intimately part of the story of this land.
And I think to prove your point, from my perspective, Raubenheimer, of course, many would be listening to this and wondering also for that very reason, is in fact of German origin, but it is a intrinsically South African surname. I was out on a hike recently. I managed to bump into two German hikers, Adriaan. One of them turns to me and I said, you might be interested to hear it. I was so excited. My surname's Raubenheimer. He's like, I've never heard that surname before in Germany. I don't know what region that's from. And his brother attested to that. And they both said they've never heard of that surname before. And so it shows that within the history of Raubenheimer, it is in fact intrinsically a South African surname that was adopted after these settlers had first come. And also, on the other side of that coin, doesn't do me any sort of favors, because it in actual fact means robber of homes or plunderer of houses. But we're not going to go down that road. But okay, what your argument means is that the Afrikaner experience is intrinsically linked to South Africa, whether we like it or not. From a historical perspective, the story has played out, and now we need to decide what that story is going to look like soon. Yeah, we have these 49 Afrikaners who have decided, for better or worse, they think there are greener pastures over in the US. You've repeated endlessly in your opinion pieces in the past, Adriaan, that it is a fact that we've enjoyed as whites in this country, the experience of privilege et al., that when the Malemas and the Trumps come along and say what the experience is over here, nothing can change that fact, right? That many of the heads of big private businesses in this country happen to be white male dominated too.
Afrikaners are incredibly privileged tribe. I don't have the research in front of me, but I would guess it's one of the most wealthy tribes in Africa. Afrikaners have managed to make a huge success of their being in Africa and in South Africa in the fields of business, particularly agriculture, manufacturing, energy, the arts, sports. We can all come up with names if we want to. And Afrikaners belong here. The argument that Afrikaners are victims because they are white of a regime, and that they are persecuted and that they are driven and violated because they are white is simply a lie. It's one of the biggest lies of our time that we've just seen playing out in real time. It's an absolute fraud, Graeme. When I watched the Deputy Secretary of State Department Landau last night,
Chris Landau,
welcoming these Afrikaners. I mean, it is a fraud. It is an absolute fraud. And in the same aspect, America refusing to take real refugees, people from the Sudan, 100%. People from Afghanistan, people from Syria, people from countries that are literally war-torn, where people have to flee for their lives every day. It's false. It is a false argument. At the same time, and I just wanted to add this, Graeme, because I can see where the criticism is going to come from. And I want to put this out there because we need to deal with facts. At the same time, South Africa has a massive crime problem. And nobody should deny that. Not the government, not you and me, not anyone. But that is our problem. It's our problem in South Africa. It's not Donald Trump's problem to solve. It's a problem that we as a sovereign country must solve. And we've been unsuccessful. 72 people are murdered per day in South Africa. The majority of those people are black men. They are not Afrikaners who are persecuted for being white. That is the facts. Those are the facts. We have an enormous crime problem, and nothing that Donald Trump or Chris Landau can say can take away from that. We have a crime problem. It is a massive problem, but it is not based on race, and we are certainly not refugees.
Yeah, I certainly got this feeling of vertigo almost watching that press conference, if you will, unfurl at that airport just outside Washington, D.C., where the 49 Afrikaners were gathered with their children. And here's, the Deputy Secretary of State walking around saying, you can plant your seeds here, you can change your fortunes. Here they were persecuted for all of these things. And I just got this intense sense of vertigo, myself being out in the Eastern Free State, interviewing black farmers who were also, the victims of intense crime, livestock theft, all of these things. Black farmers also being killed around during the time of the Senekal political sort of standoff that had emerged between the EFF and the farmers at the time, some years back. Yeah, I really got this intense sense of vertigo. Like, what series are we watching here? What TV show is this? No, it's actually rooted in reality. And it really comes down to this one conversation I saw on Facebook, and help me out here. On one side of this conversation, there was a woman saying, well, we don't know the experiences of these 49 Afrikaners and what they went through in their own experiences on their particular farms, if what Chris is saying is correct, that they're all farmers. That regardless of black farmers, farm owners taking over these plots in some instances, they've had the same experience of crime. And so their leaving to the US may be justified. And then on the other side of that argument is that what you've just alluded to is that there's this assessment that because they're labeled refugees and white ones at that, that they're white, that they're clearly unduly benefiting from this US program when other countries with people who are genuinely being driven out from their abodes aren't necessarily getting the same treatment. And I feel that hypocrisy is not being called out effectively enough.
But I also don't think these two things are in contestation. I think what we must be very clear is that we're talking about refugee status here. We're talking about a country coming to fetch citizens on a private chartered jet, taking them to another country to live there, removing them from a country where they are allegedly persecuted because of the color of their skin. That is what happened here. We're not talking about people leaving South Africa because they were victims of crime. And I'll tell you now, Graeme, I will not judge a person who leaves a place because they were a victim of crime, because it's not my lived experience. I cannot imagine how it must feel surviving a brutal assault in your house or on your farm or in your shop or in your shack on the Cape Flats. I don't know, and I will not judge any person who chooses to leave the country. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about people leaving as refugees. That brings a whole new dynamic to it. That means they are persecuted actively by this government because they are white, and that is simply not true. You heard Donald Trump, the president of the United States, again saying yesterday, using the words genocide, saying that there is a genocide against white South Africans that the government is planning to grab their land. This is just not true. And then also mixing in Julius Malema singing "Kill the Boer" always to give it a bit of spice. Whatever you say, however you look at the circumstances, we have a system of jurisprudence in this country. The Expropriations Amendment Bill is before the Constitutional Court at the moment. If the court so deems that it is unconstitutional, it will be set aside. We know that the Constitution in Section 25 protects the land, the value of land, and say that it must be fair and equitable, any land transaction. We know that Julius Malema's support has been plummeting, and that is a story that the right commentators in South Africa do not want to hear. Julius Malema's support has been plummeting. His style of singing these kind of songs, saying very popular things, has not been working for the EFF. The EFF's polling at 6% of the support. By far the majority of black South Africans do not support Julius Malema, his messaging, his style, or his songs. And That is the lie. The lie is that because a black man, Julius Malema, sings this song, that means all black people believe farmers should be killed. Lie, fat lie. And I think that is, again, coming back to my piece, Afrikaners are not stupid, Graeme. The majority of Afrikaners will not use this program. By far the majority of Afrikaners will remain in South Africa, will continue their businesses, will continue their farms. I spoke to some farmers and some people in organized agriculture over the past few days. They don't know where this is coming from. They don't know any of those farmers on this program. They are continuing their life. They're going to Botawil tomorrow for the Nampo Oesfees. I'm really not sure how to translate Oesfees harvest festival into Afrikaans. But they're going to go there. They're going to celebrate the harvest. They're going to buy new tractors. They're going to show off the produce. John Steenhuisen, the Minister of Agriculture, will be there. That is the real story of Afrikaners in 2025. Are things perfect in South Africa? Absolutely not. Do we have many problems? Yes. Is crime one of them? Absolutely. Are white people the only victim of that poorly managed and run state? Absolutely not. In fact, poor black people, and specifically poor black women, are much more at the mercy of a poor run state with poor service delivery, with poor policing, with poor health service, and a bad education.
Yeah, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head. And of course, the experience of Afrikaners, and especially white people in this country of today, enjoy still a sense of privilege in many aspects. You also allude into your piece how there is a minuscule amount or number of white South Africans that have fallen on hard times. Yes, we see them at the robots, but they're not forming the major sort of population demographic in this country, right? That is a fact and something to also just consider in the bigger swing of things. What do you think government needs to do here? That's been a big question facing a lot of people looking at the story at the moment. We now have gotten word from the International Relations Ministry that President Cyril Ramaphosa is due a working visit in the US ahead of the G20 summit later in the year. We still haven't even appointed a US ambassador, relying on Mcebisi Jonas as our special envoy, despite all the previous remarks that he had made against Trump, which did no favors once that came out in the wash. What does government need to do here to sort of reverse things? It seems like the calls that Ramaphosa had made to his US counterpart, Mr. Trump, aren't necessarily working out, because Trump was just on the airwaves last night on defending this whole refugee program.
Look, I think just a few points to your questions. I think firstly, Afrikaners are from South Africa, and I just want to make that point again. This is the country where we belong. I don't judge people for traveling or for going to live in other countries. I know I have family and friends who live abroad,
absolutely,
who are experiencing the world. The world has become much more globalized. They didn't flee South Africa. They don't hate South Africa. In fact, they love South Africa. They love coming here, but they want to experience something else. And again, to my previous point, I will never, ever judge someone who voluntarily goes elsewhere because they were a victim of crime in South Africa. I cannot think or imagine at that person's mindset. My issue here is the lie of refugeeship, the fact that there's persecution. What must the government do? I think we've heard from Minister Lamola's office that a meeting is being set up between President Ramaphosa and President Trump. The problem with Trump is that he's sticking to his lie. He's sticking to his lie of white genocide in South Africa. And even if Ramaphosa gives him the facts, we know that Trump isn't a big fan of facts. In fact, his time period will probably in history be remembered as the post-fact era, or the era in which facts were done away with and where people just kind of made decisions based on emotion and rhetoric and lies. I suspect Ramaphosa, knowing a bit about him and his style, will be to go back to the fact, and I think that's the right decision. I think you can never try and win a political argument just with rhetoric when Trump has made up his mind. You have to show him the facts. What he does with those facts is up to them, but you have to show and publicize the facts around crime, the facts around farm murders. We know that only a small a percentage of murders take place on farms. Terrible, terrible crimes. Always, all murders are terrible. But it is simply not true that the majority of murders are against white people and white farmers in South Africa. Show him those facts. Show him what you're doing to fight crime. I would also like to see that plan, by the way. Showing what you are doing to counter corruption. show him what you have done at the SIU, at the NPA, the cases in court, and then try and make a deal. We know that Trump wants to make a deal with us. We've heard about chicken and pork and blueberries that America wants to import to South Africa at cheaper rates. Those are the kind of things that Trump is ultimately interested in.
Get Trump at the Harvest Festival, Adriaan. Get Trump at the Harvest Festival. That would be the perfect way to do that. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, Donald Trump has never been to South Africa. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah.
So, here's this man blustering about a country that he really knows nothing about. He loves South African golfers. We know that he has a specific like and love for Gary Player and Ernie Els. So, maybe President Ramaphosa should take one of them along to kind of ease the tensions. But this is unfortunate the person of Trump. This is the character we're dealing with here. It's someone who faces no consequences. It's someone for who accountability doesn't matter, who can just say anything, who can do something crazy like this, bring white South Africans as so-called refugees. I heard yesterday some of the journalists at this press conference actually challenging Landau on the fact that they are only allowing these so-called refugees and not refugees from other countries into the United States.
Was a BBC question, if I remember correctly, Adriaan.
Yes. And I mean, that should be called out. Those lies should be called out. And, who knows what happens in a few years' time. I think these South Africans are in for a rude awakening about what they can or cannot do in America, about the cost of living, about the lack of people who work for you in your house, people who work for you on your farm. I think a rude awakening awaits them all. And as someone on one of the social channels said this morning, I won't be surprised a few of them or many of them are back in the next few months.
And the question is now, of course, with the refugee process and them now being termed as that within the context of the US, what does that mean officially if they had to want to decide to come back to South Africa? Lastly, Adriaan, there's been this suggestion from the sort of media filter point of view that because an ANC politician or a minister comes along and says, crime does affect everyone, the media, perhaps News 24, we show stats to prove that is indeed the case. You and I have just spoken about it. Then the media gets labeled leftist. We're posturing to the ANC for showing that the evidence does in fact prove this, that it doesn't sit well with obviously this right-wing extremist narrative that has been perpetuated on social media platforms like X, which News 24 has exposed one of the big proponents of that, Twatterbaas, of course, which is a conversation I've had in a previous episode. Of course, government came out and also condemned that this, Twatterbaas exists. All of that sort of coalesces to create these sort of enemy within this, that the media is this big leftist enemy. I'd like to really just gauge your view on that very quickly, just to end off.
Well, these are people who don't care about facts. It's as simple as that, Graeme. And they are trying to make their podcast businesses based on outrage and labeling people. That's not our business. Our business is one of facts and one of truth. We are significantly and fundamentally committed to the truth and to facts. That is the business that we deal with and that we deal in, and we will not stray from that. Our opinions are informed by facts. Our opinions are not informed by emotion or what we would like to believe or our prejudices, but about facts. And we will always bring our readers back to the facts. And great gratitude to people who read us and who come subscribe to News 24 and other legitimate news platforms in South Africa and abroad, because I think that is ultimately where you should get your information, where you should get your facts from, on which you base your opinions. I'm afraid of a world in which people can just make up stuff and broadcast it and push that outrage button for the clicks and the dollars, in ads. This is not our business. Our business is one where we are regulated by the Press Code of South Africa. Everything we say is regulated. If we make mistakes, and we do, then we admit our mistakes, we apologize, we correct them, and we move on to the next story. So I am very proud of what we have built here. I'm committed. I think the majority of South Africans understand this. I think the majority of South Africans are reasonable people, or people who want a great, prosperous future for their children who want a house, who want a job, who want to live in a democracy where they can say and think and read what they want, and who see a future for them and their children. And I think that's a broad agreement of most South Africans.
And a robust democracy at that. A glimmer of hope that we're seeing within the establishment of a national coalition is showing the signs of a fantastic democracy. Adriaan Basson's opinion piece has more than 200 comments at the moment. It's trending on the front page of News 24. I am an Afrikaner, not a refugee. Go and read it. It's short and sweet and to the point. And as you've just heard in our conversation right here on The Lead, engage with us. Please drop us a mail, thelead@24.com. Baie dankie, Adriaan. I really appreciate it. See you soon back in Cape Town.
Dankie, Graeme. Mooi loop.
To our trending topic now, and over the past 40 years, the Episcopal Church in the United States has assisted the US government in settling about 100,000 refugees. But now the church says no more. Presiding Bishop Reverend Sean Rowe says their bipartisan US refugee admissions program has been shut down as of January. Because Rowe says no other new refugees have come, staff have been fired, and funding remains uncertain. The White House then recently directed the church to help resettle the 49 Afrikaners who had touched down in Virginia this week. But the Episcopal Church says, in light of its historical alliance with the Anglican Church of Southern Africa and shared commitment to racial justice, it won't assist the Afrikaners. Rowe says it's been painful to watch how the Afrikaners have received preferential treatment over refugees who've languished in camps or dangerous conditions for the longest time. Meanwhile, our government has again reiterated that crime affects all in South Africa and that the Trump administration's mission here is politically motivated, designed to call our constitution into question. That story thanks to Nicole McCain. And finally, your Eskom's load shedding is back. No surprises there. That's stage 2 power cuts during the evening peak periods, at least until Thursday. But did you see over in Europe recently, major electricity outages in Spain, Portugal and France had people panicked and confused? Well, Mzansi's comedians had a field day in response, offering some sage advice to our European counterparts, as indeed we happen to be the load shedding experts. Just have a listen for yourself.
Firstly, power outages, that's our thing. It's a South African thing. It's ours. Okay, France already stole our 7-1 splits. Stop stealing. Secondly, it made international news. Their power went out and it made international news. Like, the whole world knows. Do you think that when our power goes out, the whole world knows? No, not even we know when our power goes out. We only know when we can't connect to the Wi-Fi that our power is out. Not even we get told when it's out. Thirdly, I love how the whole world is now debating what caused this power outage in Spain and Portugal. What could it have been? Was it too many stars in the sky, too few stars in the sky, too much wind, too little wind, the sun in the wrong place, the moon in the wrong place, atmospheric vibrations? Please, when the power goes out, it means too many of you had your geysers on, you had a pool pump running, or your government didn't get the VAT increase they asked for.
That clip courtesy of comedian Rory Petzer.
From reflecting on the Amerikaners' refugee question to laughing off our load-shedding blues, South Africa, as they say, is always alive with possibility. Thanks for your comments from our last episode, the First Amerikaners Leave essay with Alex Midgley. We've been receiving a lot of commentary, flabbergasted writes, and good for them, wishing you love, prosperity and health, quote unquote, yonder, and you might just achieve it. Shark had responded in turn, being Afrikaans means you will succeed. And User Unknown writes, last thing I would want to do before boarding a plane is speak to you. And As a Man Thinketh responds, when are you boarding? Trump's team is parading the 49 in front of the media in the US. They're being made the bum of Trump's joke. Thank you so much for all your comments there. It's good to see a lot of people engaging with the show these days. If you'd like to send more of your mails, you can comment on all of our previous episodes, simply mailing us thelead@24.com. I check that mailbox every day and read out all of your comments there. Of course, if you'd like to be reminded of all our future episodes, you've got to hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels to be notified. My name's Graeme Raubenheimer, and so long as there's news, we'll have the lead.